Join us now to kick off the show for this really important conversation, Dana Sussman, Deputy Executive Director at that group we just told you about a moment ago, the National Advocates for Pregnant Women. Welcome to the show. Really appreciate your perspective. We've known for several days. I followed the case in Oklahoma very closely. I knew that it would be of national importance, and it will continue to be so. So the argument here from the state in this case was that if Brittney Poolaw, if this now 21-year-old, then 19-year-old, had not used methamphetamine, the fetus in the case would have been carried to term. Why is this the line that the state of Oklahoma is pushing from your perspective, especially considering the fact that the medical examiner could not even cite that as the explicit cause of death?
It's a great question. Not only did the medical examiner not attribute her drug use to causing the miscarriage, but no expert testified at trial to that either. And we know from scientific research, from peer-reviewed studies, that no controlled substances cause pregnancy loss, cause miscarriage or stillbirth. And yet we hear this trotted out time and time again. I know this case shocks people, but it is not as unique as people think. It is not as uncommon as people think. And when we represent, we advocate for women who are prosecuted in relationship to their pregnancies, most frequently when it involves drug use. And we see this rhetoric that has deep roots in the war on drugs, in the crack baby, the so-called crack baby myth from the 1980s and 90s, again, targeting Black women and people of color. We see this rhetoric come out without any medical or scientific basis. And again, and in Oklahoma, laws restrict prosecutions of women in relationship to their pregnancy unless it involves a, quote, viable fetus. So we're talking about a prosecution of a young woman who experienced a pregnancy loss without any basis in science, medicine, or the law.
Dana, what do we know about, if I'm not mistaken, this was a one-day trial that Brittney Poolaw faced. So imprisoned here essentially for a year and a half, could not meet $20,000 in bond. And this whole thing seemed to be settled very quickly to then go and sentence her for a 4-year term. What do we know else about that specific one day? You mentioned there a moment ago some other experts that testified. Those details haven't really been publicly reported too much. What else should we know from that day?
Well, I'll note that we were not present in the courtroom and you couldn't zoom in for the trial, but we have spoken to several people who were present for that one-day trial. And what we know is that the defense, her lawyer, her court-appointed attorney, did not put on any witnesses, that the prosecution, I believe, only put on 2 witnesses, neither of whom identified methamphetamine use or any substance use as the cause of the miscarriage. Because they can't, because there's no scientific basis for that. And of course, the medical examiner's report, as you noted, listed multiple potential contributing factors to the miscarriage. And I also want to note that for many miscarriages and pregnancy losses, we never know the cause. 10 to 15% of all pregnancies, known pregnancies, end in miscarriage. And the number is even higher if you include pregnancies or miscarriages that end before someone even knows that they're pregnant. When we're talking about a 17-week miscarriage, this is in that zone of pregnancy where miscarriages are common and where causes are never determined. So the trial was, as you mentioned, very short. The defense did not put on any witnesses in defense of Ms. Poolaw, and the jury only deliberated for 2 to 3 hours. I'll also note that her sentence is 4 years, which is the minimum. She could have faced life in prison for this charge.
What are you most closely following as it pertains to, I suppose you call it like the standard of viability, right? This has been, first established by Roe, upheld by Planned Parenthood v. Casey. I know you're following the cases out of Texas and specifically Mississippi most closely here. What does that mean in terms of what states might be able to do? I mean, listen, the Supreme Court's going to take up the Texas case on a fast track November 1st. They're going to take up the Dobbs case out of Mississippi December 1st. It takes between 2 and 3 months or so for the decisions to be released. I mean, a year from now, we could be talking about a whole new reality for this conversation, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely. Our organization has tracked every prosecution of someone based on the basis of pregnancy or a pregnancy outcome, including abortion, since 1973, since Roe. And we've identified 1,600 cases from 1973 through 2020. We know that if Roe is overturned, or if the protections that reside with Roe are substantially diminished, that it allows prosecutors to use this theory that fetuses are people, that they can be victims of crimes, and unleash more prosecutions against pregnant women. I try to avoid being hyperbolic, but I do think that when someone experiences a pregnancy loss, the fact that police may come investigate that pregnancy loss is not going to be as unusual as it is now. Any pregnancy loss under, quote unquote, suspicious circumstances could be suspect and could be, ripe for investigation and prosecution. And we know that, again, that this disproportionately impacts Black women, Indigenous women, women of color, drug using women, women with disabilities. This is this surveillance and policing will fall to the same folks in our country that all other systems of policing and surveillance target. And yeah, we are incredibly concerned.
Of course, and I don't think you're being hyperbolic. I don't think anyone that's sounding the alarms right now are. I mean, one of the questions the Supreme Court will face in the Dobbs case is, are all bans on pre-viable abortions unconstitutional? Which there's always been established precedent in the spirit of stare decisis one way, but this is the Supreme Court. They're taking this case for a reason, and so we're going to follow it very closely. Okay, before I let you go, what is next in your campaign to help Brittney Poolaw specifically in your other advocacy work as it pertains to the story?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking that. We have launched a few actions for Brittney directly. You can go to our website, advocatesforpregnantwomen.org. We have a dedicated fund that we're collecting donations directly for Brittney, not for her legal advocacy or her legal team. She's receiving those services pro bono, but this would go to her for whatever her needs may be, either while she's incarcerated or after. And we also have a letter writing support letter campaign ongoing. We've received over 700 letters and notes of support that we are collecting and mailing and sending to Brittney in the hopes that she'll be bolstered by this outpouring of support and outrage on her behalf.
Well, like I said, we call it the Justice Department and the justice system for a reason, but all too often, especially the voices that we're talking about, Dana, the one thing they don't get in these cases is justice itself. So thank you for the work that you're doing. We promise to stay on top of this story and make sure that people really know what is at stake in the coming months here in Washington with the Supreme Court, because this issue is not going away. Dana Sussman is Deputy Executive Director at the National Advocates for Pregnant Women. Thank you very much. And have a nice weekend. I really appreciate your time